Thank you so much, Grania. Thank you, Anya, for your amazing presentation. Thank you, everybody who's joining me here today. Yeah, it's just so amazing whenever I teach tracking. Normally I can only teach as many people as I can fit around a muddy puddle. So that there are 85 of you here today is just a bonus for me, and hopefully a bonus for all of the wildlife out there and this ancient skill that I want to introduce you to today. So just a little premise on the title of this workshop, because yeah, I guess I understand that the word belonging can evoke a lot of different feelings for people, and especially the way it's used here as a verb. So the title of this workshop is Wildlife Tracking as a Way of Belonging Ourselves to the Land. So this comes from, it's very influenced by a woman called Toko Turner from her book Belonging. So highly recommend that book. It's called Belonging, Remembering Ourselves Home. And I just have a little excerpt from this that I'd like to read, which has really influenced my work with Wild Awake, and particularly in my work in contributing to reviving this ancient skill. So she says, most of us think of belonging as a place outside of ourselves, that if we keep searching for, that maybe one day we'll find it. But what if belonging isn't a place at all, but a set of skills or competencies that we in modern times have lost or forgotten? So Tokopa in this book really advocates for us using belonging as a verb, and that we can be active agents in belonging ourselves to a place if we don't feel like we have that belonging. And it's my belief and my hope that through practicing these really ancient skills, which have been so key in our development as humans, that we can begin to re-belong ourselves to a place and then to care about it. So yeah, I'll just invite you to watch this 8-minute video, which is really a beginning into tracking, which begins with exploring the mind of a tracker. So I'll see you back here in just over 8 minutes. So thank you.
Okay, Lucy, that was lovely. I mean, I've seen it already, so I knew how great it was. And we have lovely comments here in the chat again about how great it is. Do you want to speak on that a little bit, or?
Sorry, Ganya, your connection's just not great. But yeah, thank you for all the comments. I can see them coming in, and it's so lovely to feel like people sense that they were there as well. And yeah, I'm going to chat a little bit more about how we can learn more about these skills and how we can deepen these. So if there's no questions, I do have a slideshow to show people. So I think I'll just go ahead with that then.
That would be great.
Great. Okay, can everybody see that? Hope so. Great. So yeah, we were beginning just with how to enter into that tracker's mind. So I was really inspired last night when Richard Louv was talking about, you know, the 30 senses and how much of our sensory perception we tend not to tune in with. So yeah, I often see tracking as a way of just tapping back into that sensory awareness of our place. Yeah, it's a very powerful experience for me, even just to tune into that wide angle vision and just to start to listen to all the layers of sound that there is in a woodland. So tracking, yeah, well, the great news is that you're all already trackers. So yeah, we were born trackers. You know, all of our ancestors were trackers. There was at least one that was a very good tracker. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now. And Anya was introducing us to some gorgeous ways that we can be tracking without even realizing. You know, we can be tracking through history, you know, the census in our area. We can be tracking the maps, seeing where our waters come from. We can be tracking the tides, the stars. It doesn't just begin and end with animals, though they are a great place to start, particularly because you can have these magic experiences with them if you encounter them as well. So something that really drew me to tracking, apart from like this amazing sort of sensory awareness that we can cultivate, is a theory that has been put forward that tracking is actually how our brains developed. So when our ancestors began to look at the patterns, the symbols on the ground, and then to attach them to an actual animal that has a life, you know, and attaching that story onto that track. So it helped our brains to grow spatially, to think symbolically. So really just such a powerful thought for me. And it's, yeah, as I said, not just animals that we can be tracking as well. We can also be tracking the plants, we can be tracking the trees. So thinking about like a tree, what information we can gather from a tree. So what age it is, what soil it might be growing in, what the weather trends are, where the sun is shining on it. And I really recommend the work of Tristan Gooley, the natural navigator, if you've ever come across him for this kind of work. So essentially, with wildlife tracking, everything leaves a track. So whether that is the actual footprint or paw print or hoof print, or it's a piece of sign. So everything is leaving a trace as it moves through the landscape. So it could be feeding, it could be a bed, it could be scat, which is a tracker word for poo. Um, And as we begin to learn how to identify these tracks and signs, and as we learn how to identify these tracks and signs with the behaviors of the animals, well, really for me, that is about storying the landscape. And it was such a huge saving grace for me during the 2 kilometer protocols, where, you know, each day I was going out from my house like many of us and exploring what lay in this 2 kilometer radius. And the joyous thing about tracking is that you realize that that 2 kilometers is never going to be the same, because the story will be different day to day with the tracks you're reading. So from one night to the next, there could have been a murder in the night. You could find the remains of a wood pigeon, or you could find new tracks of a pine marten or a fox. So yeah, really bringing the place and bringing our landscape to life. And as I said in the video, for me, this is very powerful when I begin to rethink myself as a part of this story and not just the human protagonist. So I'm actually following the story of another, and developing that connection across species as well. So yeah, we're reading the story of life. And yeah, I think it's always worth saying that although this is a skill that was practiced by all of our ancestors, it's also predominantly an Indigenous skill set, and it's Indigenous people who have kept this skill alive in the face of so much oppression and adversity. And I'll talk a little bit more about how this skill has spread through Northern Europe and North America um, a little later on. But yeah, just to show immense gratitude to those Indigenous peoples who have kept this art alive. So I hope I've piqued your interest enough to talk about how to get started with wildlife tracking. So yeah, getting started, there's a saying in tracking: you're always right when you track alone. So what this means is it's really good to go out with a friend, at least one or a couple, because when we're looking at a track together, you know, everybody's perspective feeds into it. And it's very easy to, you know, look at a track and say, oh, well, I know that's a fox track, but somebody else might notice something that you haven't. So it's great to find a community of trackers, and I'm going to speak more about how we can grow this community in Ireland a little later as well. So another great thing for me about tracking is there's no kit required. So you can literally just walk out your door, and it really does not even need to be in a very wooded place. I think a lot of us realized over lockdown how much the wildlife there is in urban spaces as well. So there are ways that we can create like track traps in urban places by putting out sand or making a muddy area in your garden, and looking out for signs that way as well. So no kit required, which for me makes this a very accessible skills to lots of people if they just go out with that awareness. So yeah, what we're looking for. So with this idea of everything leaves a track, um, we can be looking for the track of an animal, so the actual print that it has left, whether that's from a paw or a hoof. And from that, we can begin to deduce lots of things. So the direction the animal was moving. We can stop and look at how many toes it has. Does it have any claws? Where are they? What are the shapes of them? What are the shape of the pads that you can see? And how many of them are there? And then their relative positions. So we often talk about the negative space in tracking. So the negative space is the space that is pushed up between the tracks. And then it's not just the tracks that we're looking at either, it's also the signs. And quite often sign tracking is a lot of what I do. I think when people think of wildlife tracking, they imagine like this beautiful long set of tracks which are, picture perfect, and it's so rarely the case. It's like one little toe track, that you'll find. So finding other signs really helps us, so we can find evidence of beds, of feeding, of scent marking, of scat, feathers, bones, which are known as the final track. I love that. Or fur. So, the animals are living out there all the time. So through their lives, they're leaving signs as they move. And it can turn into quite an interesting and scandalous reality show. There's so much happening all the time. So it's important when you go out that you also are anticipating what you might find. So it's a great idea to think about, well, what actually lives in my landscape. There's no point in going out to look for a polecat, for example, in Ireland. They're not here. Or like deer in your particular area. It's great to know what the tracks look like, because who's to say, that there wasn't a pine marten there for the past 20, 30 years, but now one has moved back in. So it's good to know what the tracks look like, but definitely having an idea of what you might find is a great place to start. And yeah, just like cities, some places are busier than others. So I'm going to talk about this in the next slide, but there are some places where animals will congregate more than others. So there's this great quote that I love from a fantastic tracker called Sue Morse in North America, whose organization is called Keeping Track. I'm kind of jealous I didn't come up with that. It's so clever. So she says half of tracking is knowing what to look for, the other half is looking. So yeah, I just love this. And yeah, if we think about like looking, we need to know where to look. And we need to think about what is it that the animals are doing out there. So how are we going to be able to find them easier? So one example is thinking about what pushes and pulls animals across landscapes. So, all animals, just like us, have basic needs. They have need for sleep, for food, for water, for sex, for scent. So it's like all of these things are happening all of the time. So where are these needs being met in the landscape? So where is the food in this landscape? Where is the water in this landscape? where is a good place for an animal to bed down. And particularly when I'm trailing deer, if I go into a woodland, it's like, okay, well, it's midday, the deer were really active during the night and in the morning, and in the day they want to go somewhere where it's safe, where it's protected, where they can sleep without worrying about being disturbed, and also where they have a really great where they get a good sense of the scent on the wind, because their sense of smell is just incredible. They'll so often smell me before they see or hear me. So yeah, where are the breezes in the landscape as well? And then also thinking about, yeah, so like where do they eat and what do they eat and where is it? So there's a concept called lacks and larders. So a lack being a place in a landscape where there isn't much food. So if there isn't much food for small rodents or small insects, moving up through the food chain, we're not going to see any of those bigger mammals in this area either. And larder then being a place where there is a lot of food, so there's going to be more of an abundance of biodiversity. So I actually show you an example of this in the next video as well. Along rivers and streams, so again thinking about that need for water. And then also substrate. So substrate is just a fancy word that trackers have for the ground. So we want the substrate to be able to register tracks, like this really beautiful fox track that is pictured here. So along rivers and streams, we'll quite often find really good mud, which will hold tracks. Below bridges is another amazing place to look. On estuaries as well, and on beaches are great places to look for tracks if that's what you're looking for. And edges and transition zones. So this is really important to me actually, because I've studied permaculture, and I'm sure anybody who studied permaculture or knows anything about ecology knows of the abundance that there is at edges. So it's normally the place with the most amount of biodiversity as we transition from one zone into the next, and quite often where animals are going to find a lot of safety as they're moving through a landscape. So an edge is going to provide a little bit more shadow, a little bit more cover, and all the animals are going to be congregating there. So edges are incredible places to look. And I also think about this when I reflect on my own inner tracking as well, which I'll often bring this into my tracking workshops of what are our own personal edges, what are our learning edges, and then the edges and the fringes of society. So this feels so it's so important now, it is always, but particularly when we're seeing the movements like Black Lives Matter and listening more to the marginalized voices in our communities. Like, those are the communities that know what it is to live on the edges and can teach us so much about how to live, how to survive, and how to thrive in these places and at the fringes of society.
Lucy, I'm just gonna quickly just to say that we're at 25 to 4, and the second video is 20 minutes. So
oh, great. Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow.
I know. I wish I could
okay.
forever.
Can I fly through? I'll fly through the end of it.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. And then so this is kind of the last slide anyway. So holding the question, really important part of tracking. So not jumping to conclusion. So really stopping, observing what we see, and just kind of recording all of the information that we see before we jump to a conclusion. And just lastly to say that for me, like, tracking, a big part of it is cultivation of empathy as well. So empathy for ourselves, empathy for each other, and for the landscapes that we're in, and then empathy across species as well. So when we kind of read the story of another who we think that we don't have anything in common with, we can develop empathy. And reflecting on what Richard Louv said last night about human loneliness and species loneliness, if we're paying attention to the world around us, so we can never truly be alone. So I'll stop there.
Just Amazing. Thank you so much. I've embedded the video a few times into the chat just to let people have a chance to kind of get it up and running. But I'm going to put it in again now here, and there'll
Brilliant,
also
thank you.
be the slide with the link to the second video in as well. Okay.
Perfect, thank you so much.
have some confirmations that people are finished. So I think we're just going to dive back in. I apologize if a few people aren't finished just yet. I had a message from Helen who says that her cat enjoyed the bird noises from the first video. Lucy, that was incredible. I think like you should have a YouTube channel, really.
I do.
Will we share the details for that?
Yeah, I can try and find it.
We'll put it up there.
Lucy O'Hagan on YouTube anyway.
Lucy O'Hagan, okay, fabulous. And I just was going to say, I saw that on your website as well. So much of your learning has come from the plants, animals, the land, and my hands, but they don't issue certificates. And I just think that's so lovely. And I was just looking that you have so many credentials to your name. Can you talk to us a little bit about where you've studied and where you've learned and kind of?
Yeah. I mean, I studied social anthropology in university, and kind of came back to nature through the forest school movement. So there's a really amazing, thriving forest school network in Ireland. It's so amazing to see all those faces here. So yeah, I trained through Forest School Ireland with Circle of Life Rediscovery, and that really unleashed me back on the path of nature. And then it was through the Woodcraft School in East Sussex that I learned a lot of my tracking. So John Ryder there is really one of the people spearheading the revival of tracking in Northern Europe. And if people are interested, there's a system called Cyber Tracker, which is where I do a lot of my wildlife tracking learning. It was developed in the Kalahari with the Sand Bushmen. It's essentially just an amazing evaluation process where you do a 2-day workshop, you see loads of amazing track and sign, and you can maybe get a certificate at the end of it. But I'd love to host that in Ireland later this year or next year. So if people are interested in that, please get in touch with me. It would be great for it to happen in Ireland. Then my other teacher, Lynx Filden, I spent a long time living outside with her and a community of others. So that was where kind of spent a lot of time learning skills and learning things about the environment, but bringing it all together with a community of others is where the heart that Richard Louv talked about last night, that's where that all came into it for me. So that's what I'm really looking to achieve with Wild Awake, is to reweave these skills into our everyday lives and to create community that's founded in heart and in a reciprocal relationship with nature.
That's fabulous.
Sorry, Rania.
Oh no, go ahead.
Fabulous video. Thank you so much for making these videos just for, especially for the symposium. It's a real honor to be able to see them. I have so many questions, I suppose, but I have to ask you, my first question was, how important is it to be alone when you're tracking?
It's a tricky one because I really love being alone in the woods. And it really takes a very special friend if I invite them to come. My partner's just stopped coming with me completely because the walks are way too slow. It takes a long time. I mean, it depends who you go with, really. If you want to spot wildlife, maybe don't bring your chattiest friend or your dog. But as I said before, to have a community of people and friends of mine who have been out tracking with the Bushmen in the Kalahari, they never track alone, because it's about that dynamic of one person says this, one person says that, and they have to work together to come up with a cohesive story. Because if they go back to the village all with 5 different stories, well, the village is going to say you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, you can do it alone, but it's also fun to do with a group of people as well. And I think as we build this community in Ireland, then we can have lots of different forager and tracker friends to go out with.
And there's just another question from Elisa, which actually mirrors that. She said she's often in forests that are used a lot by dog owners for their daily walks. And the sense from the dogs, would that drive the animals away you know,
Yeah,
overall, or just when
absolutely.
the animals are there, I suppose? Yeah.
No, well, I mean, the dogs can smell if there's a wild animal around from a very far away. And I mean, you can still trail the animals. And I mean, when I talk about trailing, I particularly trail deer because they're large enough to leave a trail that you can follow. And I followed trails where, you know, you get to a point in the trail where you realize that the dogs that you saw 5 minutes ago, this is where the deer sped up because they heard those dogs barking. So it's not impossible to see wildlife. It's just a lot about moving away from those human trails and where people might be walking their dogs.
Lucy, I think what you're saying is really bringing to mind what we heard from Richard Louv yesterday about, just waking up to all the other senses that we have, and in a way to be able to use them is to be more alive in the forest. I'm just curious, in your own experience, in your own life, could you give us an example of when you first opened your eyes, or when you sort of became awake to a sign of something that you need to be looking out for?
Yeah, it was when I started tracking, really, because I'd been studying ethnobotany for, like, in the woods, for a year. You know, I was kind of 3 years down the line into reviving these skills in myself. And I remember the first day my teacher brought me out tracking, and it was like somebody had lifted a veil on the woodland. It was suddenly like everything was moving. There were all these stories around me. And it was just that, you know, like you like we all have this in us. You know, if we can go into a supermarket and recognize a tomato from a red pepper, you know, it's like we have the ability to recognize like differences. You know, we pick up patterns. Like we can still squint and notice a Nike symbol. You know, it's like we can still walk through the woods and pick up a fox track, but it's just it's practicing. You know, it's a muscle that we can flex. So one thing that for me was really important was, you know, I'd read about tracking, and for me it always felt like, oh, I need to be an Indigenous person, or I need to have been raised in the woods to actually begin tracking, when not at all, you know. And that's what I love about the cyber tracker system in particular, is it completely demystifies it. You know, it's like, yes, like it is very different if you're an Indigenous person and you're tracking, but we can all cultivate that inside of ourselves. You know, we can all begin to flex those muscles and tune back into all of those senses again. So yeah, tracking is a big thing.
That's great, Lucy. I'm afraid I'm going to be the killjoy and call time on our presentation, though. I hope that some year you come back in real life with us to the symposium, as was planned last March. So it would be great to do this in the woods with you. Garyland Woods was where we were due to be in March, and I'd like to do that. I just want to say quickly thanks again to our sponsors. And I'm going to share just a slide with you just about, you know, Burnbio Trust is a charity. So just rattling the virtual bucket again. So I'll put up a slide where you can either become a member, which is, you know, a huge support to us, or, you know, just to make a small donation to the Landscape Symposium. And also I'm going to launch a quick poll, which is just 3 short questions similar to last night. Thanks again, Lucy. And
Thank you.
it's the middle of the night for Richard Louv at the moment, I think. So I hope he watches this on YouTube at a later date, because I think he would have been inspired by you. So well done.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining.
Okay, so I'm going to launch this and share my screen with the program for events.